Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Marie-Therese Rossi, and I'm the chair of the Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is also being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting and to listen to the discussions taking place. So I would like to welcome everyone who is here in the chamber tonight, and also everyone who is watching on YouTube. I think it would be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. Thank you. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to remind members of the committee and anyone speaking, only to switch their microphones on when they are called to speak and to turn them off when they have finished speaking. And also, please could you remain seated and not stand up. And if any councillor wishes to speak on an item and has not been called, please raise your hand to get my attention. So there are apologies for absence from Councillor Beryl-Cox, Councillor Lindsay and Councillor Hammond, and also Councillor Anne Siren. Do any members have any interest to declare? No, okay. So I have the minutes of the meeting of the 27th of September and also the meeting on the 11th of October with Thames Water. They have been circulated. Does the committee agree for me to sign them as a correct record, or does anyone have any comments they would like to make on the minutes? Okay. So just sign them. So we are going to take the items on the agenda in order. So we are going to start with A4, which is a long report about the delivery, reach and impact of the Grenfell Recovery Programme. And this report is in draft form, so that gives the Scrutiny Committee a good opportunity to make its recommendations and comments and perhaps identify topics that would merit further scrutiny or things that we would have to look at again. So at first I will firstly hand over to Elizabeth Campbell, the leader of the council, and she will give a short introduction.
Thank you. I'm afraid it's going to be quite a long introduction, actually, but it's a very long paper. Okay, so this draft report gives an overview of the delivery, the reach, and the impact of the Grenfell Recovery Programme. And you will remember, Madam Chairman, that in 2019, the Grenfell Recovery Strategy set out the strategic direction and the aims of the programme and pledged £50 million of investment to support delivery over a 5-year period. The strategy set out our commitment to support longer-term recovery for the bereaved survivors in the local community, focusing on meeting the particular needs of specific groups, and then more broadly laying the foundations for a different kind of relationship between the Council and the communities that we serve. When you're considering this report, remember that when we agreed the Grenfell recovery strategy, the Council was only just coming out of emergency response mode. In the early stages, our overwhelming focus was on managing the transition to recovery, setting up new services, such as the dedicated service, and establishing new initiatives, such as the Grenfell Projects Fund. At the same time as this, the Council was working, and we still are working, to build trust and a more collaborative relationship with local people. A lot has changed since 2019. In December 2020, we agreed a resourcing framework. This set out in more detail what our plans were for the next 3 years of the programme, so everyone could see clearly the direction of travel and how they could be involved. The framework refined our commitments and sharpened our priorities to reflect what we were hearing from bereaved survivors and residents. In particular, we agreed to focus on increasing community involvement in the programme, and that has been our main focus. Since January, we've heard over 1,100 views from bereaved survivors and the local community. The resourcing framework also acknowledged that we could and should do more to demonstrate the impact of Grenfell recovery services and initiatives, and to share that evidence with members, partners, and most importantly, with local people. So this report is the first of a series of annual reports which attempts to address this. It goes back to the beginning of the programme to try and show what has been delivered, who we have reached through activity, and what difference it's made to the people who matter most. There's lots of evidence in the report about the difference that specific initiatives are making. However, it's the first report of its kind, and it's very much work in progress. And that's true for several key reasons. Firstly, there are new projects which are still in the early stages of delivery. We'll be reporting on the reach and impact of these projects in more detail in future. Secondly, in the early stages, the collection of data needed to assess impact was not a key priority for some partners. Many organisations were uncomfortable sharing data with the Council, and we have to work with them on this over time. And we know there's room for improvement, and we'll work with colleagues, partners, and other local organisations to build a more comprehensive picture of reach and impact. But finally, Madam Chair, and most importantly, we recognise that for many people most affected by the tragedy, it's simply too soon to talk of recovery at all, especially given that the inquiry is still sitting and key questions of justice and the memorials remain unanswered. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be asking relevant questions about what difference our activities making, but it does mean that we need to be sensitive and avoid drawing conclusions prematurely. The targeted recovery programme can only ever be a small part of recovery for bereaved survivors and local people. And this will depend on many other processes, some deeply personal and some much wider. And I think it's really vital we don't lose sight of that when we're considering the report this evening. Now, I know officers have tried to set out clearly in the report the myriad of work that's gone across the programme, and I think it's really helpful to have it all together in one report here. However, I have asked that alongside the final version of this report, which is going to come to leadership team, officers present both a much more accessible version, more appealing perhaps in style and length to local residents, together with a clear action plan on what will be done between now and the next annual report to make improvements. This will, of course, Madam Chair, include suggestions and feedbacks from your committee, and I look forward to hearing them and your views this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Before I go on to the committee, Callum and Joe, would you like to say something about the report or just take questions as they come up?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay. So thank you, Councillor Campbell. I agree this is a very comprehensive report, and to get everything together in one place. I also very much agree with what you have said about recovery, because recovery will be different for different people, and it will happen in different ways and at different speeds, and there are external factors that are going to affect it in a major way, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at the service that we are offering and trying all the time to improve it, and also to suit needs which are changing and which are not static. So I would just like to start off with one question, and then I will go to the committee. So the question I have is really directed at Councillor Taylor-Smith, Kim, that at one point in the report it says that about a fifth of people from the Grenfell Tower and Grenfell Walk are not happy in their new homes, and that is something which causes me concern. And I just say that I understand if you are unhappy in yourself, then your surroundings, you're also going to be unhappy in your surroundings. But could you give a bit more indication? Are they in the wrong place, or the wrong postcode? Or they don't like the type of accommodation, or what exactly is the problem?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, first of all, I'll start with the commitment. I mean, the commitment was to obviously to rehouse the bereaved and survivors in a good quality home of their choice, and most importantly, to settle them in those homes. And although it's absolutely right to say that we have now 190, in fact, the report needs to be updated by 196 people who've moved into a home. We still have 5 now that obviously have to be found to have a permanent home. Some have selected, and they're obviously all in good quality accommodations. That obviously deals with the initial move. Over time, it's quite clear that there was an initial rush for people to accept homes. There were a lot of people that wanted to go away from North Kensington for obvious reasons and settle in other parts of the borough. And as time has gone on, some people have changed that opinion and obviously want to move back. Other people have just not settled where they are in a particular area and have come back to us. And if you look at the percentage of people that are unhappy at the moment, we did a survey on this, and we have 22%, I think it's set out in the report, of people that indicated they're not happy where they are. That equates effectively to the same number of people who've applied to us for a second move. And that's something which we are working with them in terms of designing of how that can happen. So it's not a question of changing the commitment at all that was originally made in terms of housing. It's really just a question of adapting to changes in people's circumstances and how we're going to do that. Historically, we've tended to do that on a bit of an ad hoc basis, and we feel now, because there was small numbers involved, we feel now that it's appropriate to look at that in a slightly more structured way so people can understand very clearly what that process is. It would also incorporate all sorts of questions that are coming out, such as inheritance of social agreements, etc., coming back as well, and that's something we're doing. Of the number of people that have indicated that they wish to have a move, there is a very large percentage that comes from one particular estate, which is the Peabody estate that we have down on Warwick Road. And there is a feeling, obviously, in terms of relationships with their landlord, they're not as close as other people who have a relationship directly to a council, and if there's any issues, they can come straight to us. And that creates issues as far as communication. So a large element relates to that one area, but we are going to endeavour to work through to ensure that people are settled, because I think, as it's already been mentioned, being in a settled home is such an important component to helping somebody in their recovery.
Thank you. So, committee, who would like to start? Mo.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree. The report is comprehensive, lots of data, but there are still some information missing, and I will ask a question about that. And before asking my question I would like to comment on page 22, chart 1. Faith of those accessing the dedicated services 51% of those accessing the dedicated service identify as Muslim. I think we need to add a comment in here because almost 70% of the victims, those who perished, were Muslims. We need to add this. This is the reason we have 51% those accessing the service are Muslims. And I couldn't find information about the ultimate aim of providing these services is to help people move back to normal life, move back to jobs, and those who are studying to achieve better and give them more help. This help is already there, but my question is, how many have we managed to help to move back of those who are in receipt of these services to go back to full employment? And how many of those students we have helped to go to university with the excess service, the extra service they are receiving? Thank you.
So who would like to answer? Callum, would you like to answer?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm happy to answer that. And I think your first point in terms of clarifying the table in Chart 2, I think is well made, and we can definitely make sure that's incorporated, because that obviously does have a massive bearing both in terms of the emotional connection and the qualitative feel of the service as it develops. In terms of, if you're asking specifically about the bereavement survivors through the dedicated service, where we have a ring-fenced pool of people we're supporting, we have got a specific employment program that has supported people. Often it's not back to the same job that they were doing before. Often people have told us that they've perhaps got very involved in community work and they've wanted to retrain and reskill. So we've seen a healthy number of people access that additional support, and we've been able to top that up thanks to wider support from the council, from sort of COVID funds as well, from people who are doubly impacted. And we have seen some people return back to their employment of their own volition as well, completely. But at the same time, we know that some people, quite a considerable number of people who were working before the fire are still at this moment don't quite feel ready to go back to work. And there we work in partnership with our health colleagues to think about how we can provide essentially occupational therapy related support to enable people to take those sort of small steps towards feeling ready. In terms of employment, in terms of education, sorry, we have got here again a specific educational program that's in place, and we have seen a number of young people go to university for the first time, return back to university. We've got an additional support that's available for postgrad people who want further studies as well. I haven't got the exact figures to hand in either of those two, but I'd be very happy to provide that information to you separately.
Kazim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since I have opportunities to ask about housing in communities, I will concentrate this evening on education and wider program of the Grenfell recovery. But to begin with, at page 3, 1.6, 3 lines down, is talking about adaptability and how the program, because there was no sets of metrics, performance indicators, but then the program has to evolve and adapt the situation. And as we go along, or as you were working on for the last 2.5 years, now we are in almost halfway through the 5-year program for the £50 million. I wish to know which organizations, and maybe you cannot mention bereaved families or survivors, but which organizations, including normally the ever-present next of kin, who are not here tonight or this evening, have you been taking to the account what they have been saying, or have you incorporated their comments and advice to what they have been demanding ever since this program has started? That's my first question, and I'll come back to the second question, which is page 5, 2.2. The £50 million that has been allocated for the Grenfell recovery, specifically education. What is the percentage of it, and how is it going to be increased or decreased from further onwards? And moving to page 7, my final question, Madam Chair, if you allow me. Second point 2 is children and young people who have been affected who've been affected by the fire to feel confident about their future, and the local schools have been supported to continuing to support them to achieve excellent results. But the targeted recovery programs do not mention scholarship programs. I think we've talked about a couple of years back, and to support those who have been affected by the fire, young ones who have to do well at schools to progress into university. Some, let's say, BAME members of our community normally struggle without even having to go through what Grenfell survivors have gone through. Imagine what those kids have been feeling, and it's still up to date. So when we suggested about the program for a scholarship, it was meant to support them and to enable them to achieve higher grades so that they can go to university with Grenfell funded scholarship, or with if they could not get into, no matter how the complex is the program, they may at least get into university and apply the normal route. So was there any scholarship? Is there any way for we can do it from now onwards, since we have 2.5 years more to go? I would like to know more details about that. Thank you.
So I would say Josh, and I think maybe Callum would like to comment as well. Josh, on the second part.
Thank you. Well, I'm, with your leave, Chairman, I'll take the questions as Councillor Ali asked them, if you like. So, Councillor, you asked about comments from different individuals and different groups of the community feeding into the education of children and their well-being. So, children and young people, depending on how they have been affected by the tragedy, can access help by 3 separate ways. One's through the dedicated service, of course, if they're a brutal survivor. A second option is through the Grenfell Education Fund, which is where they're falling behind their education and they need some extra help and support through schools. And the third is through the commission service that we've done through Wellbeing and Support, of which we just recently had a consultation earlier this year in January, in order to get all the people's views that may wish to use the service. So that's people in North Kensington, that's people in the schools, people who may not necessarily have witnessed the fire itself, but have suffering effects from their friends or their other community through that trauma. So we did an extensive consultation over many weeks earlier this year in order to get everyone's views. I'm really pleased to say that a lot of people fed back to say that the service providers that were providing help, so their LCAT, Place to Be, Catholic Children's Society, I've just forgotten the top of my head, Men, yes, that's right, and Future Men, that's the other one, did supply services to them, and they're very happy with that. But we did feedback on some of their comments to say there were some things that needed to change, and that was like, through communication or through schools or through community-based settings. So on that one, we did take as many people's opinions into account as possible in order to provide the best service in relation to that. In relation to percentages of education as part of the £50 million Grenfell recovery, I don't have those details to hand, but hopefully Callum may be able to assist on that particular front. And on the third point around the scholarship, I believe that is also through the dedicated service grant that it's under the jurisdiction of Councillor Siren and Callum again, so I'm going to have to refer that to Callum, if I may, Chairman, and to get those answers.
Thank you. Callum.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Ali. Just adding to the different responses from Councillor Rendell in order of the question, as you asked the questions. I think the only thing I'd add to the first question was in terms of, you asked about how the programme has evolved and how we've listened to residents and specific groups to try and take on their feedback and sometimes challenge, and fair challenge. I think what we tried to set out in the resourcing framework back in December 2020 was a commitment to make sure we were reaching and listening and engaging with more residents and more local people and more groups. We did have some criticism when we first published the Grenfell Recovery Strategy that people hadn't felt that they'd been sufficiently involved in its design. We had done multiple exercises, but I don't think it had landed and people had quite understood. So when we published the resourcing framework, we made a real clear commitment there. And as Councillor Campbell pointed out at the beginning, we have since then, in the last year, heard from 1,100 people, but perhaps most importantly, we've also seen the growth of a number of different resident-led steering groups that have allowed people, whether they're part of a group or not, to come forwards and really help to shape programmes, whether that be in the Communities Department for the Community Programme, whether it be the Dedicated Service Steering Group, or even now also there's a gathering group of people from a housing legacy and housing allocations programme. And what's really positive about that is that it allows for ongoing progress and dialogue, and for us to be learning from the people who are most important, and those are the people for whom we serve. And alongside that, we have always had an open door to any group, no matter what type, whether they're local residents or bereavement survivor groups, to try and make sure that we're hearing those views and that there's always an open door in that space. And that continues still to today. Like Councillor Rendell, on terms of the percentages of funds, as he's pointed out, there are different aspects through the 50 million that support education. We can do the maths, I could try, but I don't think I'd probably quite get it right. But we'll do the maths and get it over to you and give you a sense. And alongside that, we also have the Grenfell Education Fund, which sits outside of the 50 million. And we've tried to allude to it in the paper that what this paper really focuses on is the narrow confines of how we've spent the proportion of the 50 million that we've spent to date. But of course, supporting Grenfell and the Grenfell community, alongside that is the wider council plan and lots of other initiatives that have been propelled and have more resource put into them to try and support the community alongside our partner organisations as well. So we can give you the figure of how the 50 million, but it's important to see it within that wider context as well. And in terms of the scholarship programmes, there was a actually really fantastic programme organised by local people, by a local resident who campaigned for a specific set of scholarships to be facilitated from one or two different universities that were made available to all survivors, and it was a lifetime commitment for children at that young age. And we've seen quite a few survivors be able to go on and make use of that. We've also seen some survivors and bereaved children we've negotiated scholarships and bursaries, not only through us, often through other advocates as well, who've done fantastic work for individuals in that space. So we have, I guess there has been work in that space, but it's not necessarily been something that we have funded or sponsored through the council, but it's something we've done in negotiation.
Ali, you want another question?
Yes, but the lead member wants, I think, to add something.
So I just wanted to say, Chair, and for the benefit of members of the committee, that just on the basis of what Councillor Ali said, especially about the first point regarding reaching out to the community, it was due to this committee and Councillor Ellison's committee that was scrutinising us and how to, in order to go out, that us as leadership team recognised that and consulted as much as possible, especially in the 6 to 8 weeks that we did in January, in order to speak to the community. So we have taken your comments on board, and this is reflected in the report. So I just want to say that it's the benefit of scrutiny, whereby we, often or sometimes don't always think about that. So it's the benefit of that that's all made us to go out and get the really best result we possibly can from members of the community and in schools that I think have made the difference now, or starting to make the difference in children and young people.
Thank you, that's good to hear.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of what I've heard in other answers, I think is brilliant, and thank you for taking the time, both Councillor Rendell and you, Callum. But specifically what I would like to know, or to get more details about it, hopefully, and can work with, we have the leader of the council here, and of course, education is Dr. Barry Quirk. We understand the importance of education and supporting children in the long term, and then when they get to the point where they can actually write solutions for the disaster, I hope that no one will have it, but just it happens any other where in the country, we can write about it and give advice and support anywhere in the world. So to do that, we need the youngsters from now who's going through step by step to do. And yes, I understand you've supported other organizations, and you've worked with institutions that may be providing bursary and scholarship, but specifically Grenfell Scholarship, where I say Grenfell Scholarship, it will have a long-term effect of the children who've been suffering, and they will be directly benefiting from. And I think that's important to distinguish. Yes, officers will work on it, but less of officers will work on it. We will know the fund will go directly to the those who will be qualified, and I believe it will be a step in the right direction, since we are commenting and providing input for the next way forward to the next 2.5 years, and perhaps it's something that the national government can contribute. And I hope the leader of the council will think about that in the long term, and the lead member for education to support those who have suffered not fault of their own. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell, sorry. Councillor Campbell.
Crispy. Yes, in answer to your question, you're absolutely right. We do think that the children who have suffered from Grenfell absolutely do need to be supported. And that's why in each area of the report you'll see, whether it's a dedicated service, the Grenfell Education Fund, targeted support within schools, or targeted support within the community. So we hope that we are looking at it from every angle and putting in support where it's needed the most and at a point which it's most efficacious. I think that's the thing. But you're absolutely right. But I just want to reassure you that we do recognise that, of course, the children and the young who have been affected by Grenfell, we absolutely need to look out for them. And we are trying in every way we can. And I don't know whether, Josh, you want to add to that?
No, I think you summed up very well.
Just to say, I've just had an email from David O'Connell from the Lancaster West residents apologising for not coming tonight, and he was going to come along with next of kin. He makes some comments which I will pass on to Callum later, but they're not 100% happy about the figures. But what everyone should know is that both reports that are here tonight that are on Grenfell will also go to another meeting, a joint meeting with the Audit Committee. I think it's the 22nd of September. So all members of the committee are obviously invited to that, and we will be able to go through the numbers in more details then. So we're not, we'll do our scrutiny now, but then we'll come together with audit and we'll do a further scrutiny. Okay, Councillor Addenbrooke, I'll take first.
Thank you, Chair. I know we have a separate paper on the dedicated service following this paper, but I've just got one question, or a couple of questions actually. So on page 25, you have the charts which show, the one on the right shows the average progress rating by bereaved and survivors is only 5.6. which I think is quite concerning, bearing in mind the service that's being provided. And you mentioned other services might have an impact on that, but there's no mention of COVID, and I would have thought perhaps COVID would have a huge impact on the bereaved and survivors in particular. And then under 5.18, the phase 1 report, review, it says 24% of those that had responded had not heard of the services, which I find quite surprising. And I wondered how you were going to address that. And then I've got a question on Grenfell Projects Fund, but do you want me to do that after that, or?
Helen, would you like to answer?
Do you want to answer those and then we'll do Grenfell?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Councillor. So, taking your first point about the progress scores at 5.14, I think that COVID probably has exasperated it in some extent, but I wouldn't want to mask the reality just under COVID in truth. I think what these progress scores are about is it's an opportunity for bereaved survivors during the creation of their support plans to sort of comment on how far they've got in their aspirations. So, for example, a support plan might articulate that someone is struggling to settle in their property and wants to move to a new property, for example. Or it might say that they're interested in getting back to work. So sometimes they're quite long-term outcomes. So we tend to look at it alongside the sort of qualitative feedback they're giving to the dedicated service to think about whether it's an issue about the complexity of the situation they face or the complexity of the goal they have in mind, or whether it's because of a deficiency in the support that we're providing. So I'm always concerned where, in the odd case, where we have low sort of feedback scores and low progress scores, that points to where we can do better. Where we see positive feedback scores but lower progress scores, it points to often the complexity, and it points to other sort of wider advocacy work that we sometimes have to do to support people to move forwards. In terms of the Commission Services communications, this is something that grates on me significantly, in truth. I find it frustrating that we have not managed to do better in this area. To some extent, it's because of how we communicate. So historically, we have, I think, probably over-relied on the relationship that a dedicated service worker has with the bereaved and survivor they support to communicate about the different initiatives and services that come forwards. What we've actually learned through the review, which I know that is the subject of a second paper, is that, well, and sorry, before I go there, and also relied on letters, and that's how we tended to communicate. What we've learned through the review, though, is that emails is definitely a much better solution, and we have now built and have consent to contact people on a regular basis through an email provision. And for example, and where we see that we have put forwards information via email newsletters, we tend not to see that same feedback. So as part of the findings from the review, we are committing to a whole range of improvements in this space that I hope will begin to address that fundamentally, because this far into the service it's not good enough.
So on the Grenfell Projects Fund, which I think is a really, really good initiative, I think we all appreciate the difficulties and delays caused by COVID to the first round of projects. But I'd like to know some of the, what have we learned from that? What projects have been successful, and what do we see as the way forward? And how sustainable is this going to be, bearing in mind I think we have another 3 years of funding?
Thank you for the question. I will answer that. We've had quite a bit of learning for the Grenfell Projects Fund. I think it was a really good initiative and real innovation. In truth, I think we put a lot of energy and attention into ensuring that the community could choose which projects they wanted to fund. And that was, in essence, us fulfilling the pledges that we made. What we've learned is that a lot of the organisations that came forward were grassroots organisations that probably didn't have in place all of the sort of infrastructure and logistics needed to actually deliver. And so much of our work, regardless of COVID interrupting, was based on business development with them, working out how, supporting them to become compliant with statutory requirements, as well as think about their business model and how to deliver. And in many ways, the Grenfell Project Fund, the first round of the Grenfell Project Fund probably fulfilled what we wanted the community leadership programme to do. It's actually built up organisations and upskilled them and individuals in how to serve their community better, but in a way that's compliant with statutory regulations. So that was the biggest learning, I think. Going forward, the community, when we went out for consultation, the community was quite clear that they wanted more oversight on the questions, how we monitor the outcomes, and they wanted to be more involved in actually, I guess, quality assuring the groups that come forward proposing ideas. So, and just more involved all round. So Callum has already pointed out about the steering group. And I think at this moment, presently as we're moving forward, the steering group have coming up with really good ideas on how they want to see the Grenfell Project Fund progress going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Evans, I believe you had a question.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all your work. It's a very thorough report, and there's so much positivity in it. Of course, we are here to scrutinize, so we are asking for further explanation. But as an overall project, I think it's excellent. I would like to know, because there was a significant amount of the proportion of the victims were Muslim. We have certain centers which are dealing with the problems of the Muslim community. But with young people, there are some problems that are universal. So do you find, I don't know if I would ask Councillor Rendell or Kalam, do you find that some of these programs, that the services, for example, of Future Men or of the Catholic Children's Society, are they offered to everyone, or are they only offered to a limited community? And because it seems to me that what they are offering in terms of support would be applicable to all children. So in which cases do you decide when this is a general offering or provision, and in which cases would you decide that they need to go into a more community, how would I say, specific provision? Would it be based on language?
Councillor Rendell.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. So yes, the services provided in the schools, which, as you'll be seeing, is on page 35. Those are offered in all schools, and anyone can, anyone can access those provisions if and when they feel necessary. So there's not necessarily a need to be from a particular faith in order to access those particular services that we provide, because many provide either services through art therapy or services through one-to-one counselling or group counselling, or depending on whatever the issue is that people may wish to have help with. So it's open to those who may wish to use it. In terms of the community-based settings, some people don't feel like they want to necessarily go through help with schools, because other students or other friends may know they're going to some assistance, some help, and they may wish their friends not to know that. So we do offer community-based settings that's provided by LCAT and Place to Be through North Kensington, and people can access those in certain times of the day or the evenings or the weekends, depending on when it is as well. So it just depends what service that we wish to provide, and we try to be as flexible as possible on that.
Jim?
Well, you just slightly touched upon the adult side of it as well, and of course the Together for Grenfell organisations are of course open to anybody, but they are obviously predominantly put together in order to address that sort of culturally appropriate need within the community. And you'll also know that of course we've increased funding for those organisations in May of this year as well.
Sorry, Councillor Evans, I should have to say that back to my response earlier, Future Men deal with young boys and young men. So obviously it's not necessarily, that's their kind of bread and butter for that particular element as well. So, but if you're a young boy or a young man and wish to access those, you can go through those services as well, but that's what they cater for that particular community.
So.
Thanks, Councillor Rossi, and thank you for the question, Councillor Evans. I think the other thing I'd just stress is that right across the programme, one of the things we're looking to do, as set out in the report, is to collect data much more systematically, equalities data much more systematically about all of the provision that we have in place. So, and that data is collected by quite a lot of providers. That includes data about ethnicity, it also includes data about gender, about the places people live at a kind of general postcode level rather than individual addresses. And I think that's really important to show right across the programme that we are reaching the full range of people, and that particular bits of the programme are also reaching that full range of residents.
Thank you, Joe. Okay. So, Councillor Pascal, and then Marwan.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Nagy. I want to ask two questions, one general and then one a bit more specific. In the report it mentions, and the leader also mentioned, the overall funding that the Council has provided of £50 million. And in parallel to that, the NHS promised to provide £50 million as well. The question is as to, could you outline, it's not so much outline the NHS's role, but it's outline where there has been joint working or enablement between the two organisations working together, and the degree of alignment and joint working, and sort of how that, what lessons have been learnt from that and how that might be improved going forward.
I can answer that. So, of course, you'll be aware that we're doing our wellbeing surveys for 5 years. They're very well responded to. Over 1,500 people have responded last time around. Admittedly, of course, predominantly done by phone due to the restrictions that were in place. As for the NHS's funding, I think this is the survey itself is really highlighting exactly where we need the NHS to focus. They are, of course, an independent body, but what the survey is highlighting is things around accessibility of their GPs, physical health, which is something we can work with them on. The NHS itself locally is also going through quite a large change at the moment. They're setting their priorities for the upcoming ICS. We are, of course, feeding in all the information that we're gathering from this survey and from wider studies as well across the borough as to how best we can improve NHS service for our residents. Of course, we will be one borough within 8 in that situation, but I believe our situation is such that they do sit up and take notice when we make our points to them. What's good about the survey is that it will be ongoing, so of course it will continue to provide that information. It's not a snapshot, and we will be able to help the NHS tailor their services over the years to come by making sure that they're responding to the survey results as and when they come in.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, if I could ask a more detailed question. And particularly the ongoing nature of that, I think, is very important. The detailed question is to do with, there's considerable mention of various therapies that we had under previous question from Councillor Evans, but there's also mentioned specifically in the report about the involvement of art therapy to do with helping people to cope with the trauma that they have. The question is around whether there's been any joint working on that with the NHS, because and schools as well, because there is now beginning to be consensus that I sense of the help that art therapy can bring in a whole number of different contexts, and that the work that's been done through the Grenfell operation no doubt will be able to provide some valuable lessons. And I know that already that hospitals such as Chelsea Westminster are beginning to change the way they face the world of trauma that they deal with, particularly in youth, and they're looking to reconfigure some of their services and work more closely with schools. And I was wondering, from the Grenfell Recovery Programme experience of working with art therapy, were there any particular lessons, and whether there's been any measurement of the effectiveness of it by independent bodies?
Thank you, Councillor Pascal. So first of all, LCAT, who provide art therapy services both in schools and in community settings, do a great job with children in order to let them, express themselves in a way that helps them recover from the trauma that they've witnessed. And in terms of looking at, in terms of data and figures, and like you rightly say, in terms of, I guess, KPIs in that respect, so I'm going to ask Annabelle perhaps if you can come in and answer that particular point in regards to that detail. In regards to working with LCAT for NHS services, I myself think that is a great idea, but I'm not sure where we are specifically on that front, and perhaps Annabelle or Callum or perhaps Jen will be able to answer that particular question.
Thank you. I think I'll probably start by framing some of the services within the sort of children and young people targeted support. We describe it as emotional wellbeing support in its broadest sense. Some of that is therapeutic support delivered by therapeutic practitioners in line with NHS models. Others are far more creative in kind of enriching activities, particularly those delivered within the community settings. So it is a broad range of early intervention support, and it sits beneath that of our NHS threshold. actually, and that was designed in a way to complement and intervene earlier before our children and young people are eligible or reach that kind of threshold that we see within the NHS. On the NHS point, we are having a series of conversations and workshops actually about that pathway. So in light of our refreshed and refocused offer, to make sure that we are as assured as we can be that there is a clear pathway from the services that we commission up to those of our NHS provided services. Actually, our kind of NHS colleagues are due to attend our Grenfell Education Forum to remind and refresh of their offer. So there is the right onward referral, and they also due this month to attend our Grenfell Provider Forum, which includes our locally commissioned services outlined within this report. Again, to refresh and remind of their offer and the need for kind of appropriate onward referral. So that partnership work is happening, and we are looking to do more to make sure we're making best use of our collective local funding and support offer. In relation to the point about measurement, I think that's a really key point about outcomes. Some of these services have very clear clinical outcome measures, and they have been established for some time. Other services that we've been commissioning, such as those sort of operating within our kind of community providers, the measurement of outcomes is something that we've been working with them on, and they have both, in light of these new agreements and arrangements, designed a new outcome framework, building on best practice from elsewhere. So it's those figures, as we talk about work in progress, it's that information that we will start to see, but it's something they've only just started to collect, and we're in our sort of first quarter.
If I could just say that I find that incredibly encouraging, that this work of measurement and sensitive work in the community and in schools and so on is all beginning to be joined up, because the difficulty very often is to take independent excellent services and make sure that they're holistic for the person who's being helped. So I look forward to further report coming out of that. Excellent. Thank you.
Marwan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this comprehensive report. And as we are going through this phase of recovery, we are now into the 4.5 years of this tragedy. And okay, as comprehensive as it is, there are some elements, especially which I wish you can just direct me to it, regarding the community. For example, in the surrounding area of Grenfell, within the 500 meters, as we define communities, we have businesses, local businesses who support our residents. Is there anywhere where we break down and bring in the business dilemma that they suffered post-Grenfell over this time? Which I tried to locate it here in your report. I can't see any reference to it. Although I know our colleague, lead member, we managed to set up the business forum in North Kensington, and I am part of it. I'm the active part of that initiative. However, is there any elements of Grenfell funding to support that initiative? And this is coupled with what my colleague, Councillor Pascal, saying with regard to the trauma and the anxiety some of the businesses I visited personally in the local community in Nottingdale. They really suffered, those who are working on those businesses, especially after the effect of what's happened. And I still did not sense any proper support from whether it's us or even the local government or the other stakeholders within that domain. And when I was looking at the different diagram, I mean, with the having the hat on, sitting on the Social Care and Health Select Committee, the Grenfell Fund and the diagram, if I may point on page 69, on the diagram, especially what attracted me on the well-being for children and young people, those completed projects, the 7, and then the others 4 still in progress. And then looking at the other type of projects, I know you are supporting residents to initiate projects. To what extent do you support those who have good initiatives? However, they are not well established. I mean, they are just emerged after the tragedy. To what extent you go that extra mile with them to help them? Because I know there are some good groups who are using football as a therapy with young people. I attended one of their tournaments, actually more than 100 that whole day. And I was there in the evening. And then I talked to some young people who are more or less like 20, 21 years old, and the level of engagement and how this helped them, helping their friends, and so how do you go that extra mile to support these basic initiatives to build capacity within the community? And with that definition, I hope you do accept that our business community, there are community within that area. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Thank you, Councillor. I guess there's a couple of different answers to the different parts of the question that you asked. I think starting with the sort of the business support, I think we have to recognise that that hasn't been an area where we've necessarily provided direct support to businesses, and I think that's something that we perhaps should and could reflect on more. We have provided support from a sort of employment perspective, but it's often been focused on the resident themselves and their possibility of either getting back into employment or getting into new employment, like we were discussing earlier. But I think one of the things that we have learned in other areas, so I think in a previous one of your committees, we were challenged on whether we'd done enough to reach out to people who live in housing associations and make sure they were connected to the support. And I think that there are actually very many initiatives within the programme, whether it be support for adults, support for children, or some of that community capacity building, that we could that would be of interest and perhaps of help to people who run local businesses. And so I think it should be a responsibility and requirement for us to make sure we are appropriately communicating and promoting the different varied initiatives we have to local businesses through forums like the one that's been set up, and no doubt others that exist. So that's something that we can take away and commit to. I think in terms of your comments in terms of how we work with sort of smaller local initiatives, there are a few ways that we have tried to do that and where we're trying to do that more. You know, for example, I know within the Grenfell Projects Fund, in the first year, we took initiatives that were very much embryonic, sort of not really even delivering, and spent quite a lot of time supporting people to try and develop their capability. You know, I think it'd be fair to say that in some cases that they didn't quite come off, but in other cases it's really enabled sort of organisations to flourish. And actually we've tried to learn from that, and I know that that's being sort of enhanced through the follow-up years of the Grenfell Projects Fund and its design now, but also our colleagues in Children's and Adults have been working on new initiatives that are closer and support and enable peer support organisations and organisations that are very new and haven't had that much funding from the council since the fire to be able to enhance and develop their skills. And we do that within the dedicated service too, through enabling what we call sort of community meetups, where any individual can come forwards with an initiative, with a plan, and we can support them through capacity building to be able to deliver. No doubt we could do that more, and we could, as you say, connect that back to the business community, but it's something that we've seen the success of and we're trying to invest more in.
So are there any other
May I?
questions?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
May I just add just a small supplementary, and I think the point is very well made, Marwan, in terms of support business. As far as any businesses that were in council property, then there was direct support that was given very much as far as businesses when they were coming forward who were impacted immediately, on baseline, or the Pink and Whistle who did so much that night. We have given support in terms of to them and their properties as well. So, but it wasn't up. But I think the point is well made generally on businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will come back to the point that I have made earlier, and Councillor Ali expanded and went into depth. I think we are just out of all the money and efforts and resources we provided to provide services. In terms of children and employment, we are judged by the outcome. So it would be useful to know how many success stories do we have, how many children we've helped to move into university, and how many of those who left employment we helped to move back to employment. Thank you.
Callum, do you wish to answer? Or?
I think it's a point well made again, and I think it's something that we can come back to.
Okay. Okay, Marwan.
Sorry, Councillor Rossi, can I just add one thing in response to that? I think it's really important both that we focus on those outcomes for bereaved and survivors specifically, but also as part of the wider monitoring work, which includes things like health and wellbeing indicators, some of the education indicators that are being tracked through the Grenfell Education Fund. We also focus on the health of the local economy, on the health of local businesses, and on the wider employment and education outcomes for the whole local community. And I think that's where the targeted programme that we have here is often focused on specific cohorts of people, but we also need to be looking to the much wider efforts of the council through the economy strategy and the work of the economic development team, and look at how that's changing the wider indicators. So I think what we've tried to do in this report is give you a sense of what impact the specific initiatives funded through the 50 million are having, but alongside that we really need to start to look, and I think we'll start to look increasingly over the next few years at those wider place-based indicators, and what they will show is of course the impact of Grenfell, but they will also show the impact of COVID and some of the other things that have happened since. And I think putting these two pieces of work together is going to be our focus, and one of the things we hope to do much more of in the next annual report in autumn 2022.
Marwan?
Yeah, thank you very much for this follow-up, and I welcome it. And I know it's quite a daunting task, but focusing on outcome, then you can really measure and see the impact, which is quite welcoming. But may I ask if we can have the very specific around the 500 meters of Grenfell, a more detailed study, which you can collate from the all the documentation we have. I just want, if you don't mind, just like a summary, a focused impact within that 500 meters. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, so I have some questions also from Councillor Hammond. So I have that one final question. It's a very comprehensive report, and an awful lot of work has gone into it, and you've brought an awful lot of strands together. So I would say, what have you learnt by doing it? Have you learnt by actually doing the report, or did it throw up surprises and, gaps that you hadn't realised, or some things were working much better than you thought, or others weren't working so well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the process of gathering and reflecting on where we have come in terms of the programme and the work that's been done and the activity that's been done has been enormously useful to gather in one place, as Councillor Campbell said in her introduction. I think partially because it's enabled us to see the connections, it's enabled us to see the progress that has been made in terms of trying to rebuild connections with our communities and try to make sure that there is support and services in place across the whole programme that are relevant to local people. But I think probably most importantly is it for me in the process of sort of being involved in the development of the report, I think it's about understanding again the value that the last year of increased attempts to hear directly from residents, both in terms of their interests, what's important to them, and what good looks like to them. I think that this paper is the first time we've been able to really see the value that brings, and I think it sort of encourages us to keep doing that and to see the benefit of that going forwards.
Thank you, Callum. And Joe?
And I just add from that, I think, I just add to that I think the local, some of the local organisations we've worked with, through the information they've provided for this report, have shown us that they've got brilliant tools for both measuring participation, measuring impact, measuring outcomes. And one of the things we've been able to do through the process of putting this together is start to assemble a bit of a kind of toolkit of those tools that we can then share with other organisations. So new organisations coming forward for the next round of the Grenfell Projects Fund, for example, or new peer support initiatives. And I think it's sharing that learning and some of those good tools, which for the most part we haven't developed, although we've supported local organisations to do so, is a really key learning for me, and actually has helped us, I think, refine the approach to outcomes and impact by listening to what local organisations are hearing directly from the people they work with.
Thank you. Jam.
Just sort of following on somewhat on the comments around outcomes and impact, which Councillor Bakhtiar raised, and also Councillor Pascal with regards to the NHS. I think something that we have learned and that we need to continue to monitor is, yes, we have learned how to measure these outcomes. We obviously have, we report back on our surveys, but what we need to do is also make sure that going forward, as the NHS takes over on the health side of things, we then become able to make sure that we're tracking their outcomes as well for our residents. It's not just simple as saying put £50 million, offer some services. We have to make sure that they're the right services for our residents, and that we continue to make sure that they, as a health provider, are fulfilling their duty to North Kensington.
Thank you, Jam. Councillor Campbell.
Yes, now I'd like to talk a bit about sort of partnership working and sort of impacts and things. If you look at paragraph 13.3 on page 88, I think that's a very helpful paragraph, because it says, it's talking about what we're doing and how we're going to monitor sort of changes over time, because of course, as you said, this is 2.5 years, but we really need to look at sort of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, don't we? And that says, that work by Council's Public Health will carry on monitoring population health and perceptions of health and well-being through the North Kensington Health and Wellbeing Survey. And the education team linked to Grenfell Education Fund, carrying on monitoring attendance, attainment, other key indicators. And then, of course, I think, as Joe said, we've really got to look at the wider work across the council, monitoring things like the key socioeconomic and health and well-being indicators. What's the rate of unemployment, which comes back to really what Marwan was saying, a sort of thing of space. And finally, outcomes to the bereaved and survivors in the local community work by the NHS, which is what Jem was saying. But we need to think of this all in terms of the wider council plan. So next year, when we're looking at a refresh, we need to go out and use these indicators to figure out what as a council should we carry on doing as a council plan which will affect everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Barry, did you want to say something?
Yes, I do think that there's, what your question really is about, the learning that's gone on, certainly in terms of the Grenfell Partnerships team, in drawing together this report. But I think it's the whole organisation, not just the team itself, the whole organisation needs to learn from this. And I think what this exercise does, first of all, it identifies the problem of quantification, because everyone wants everything quantified, but often the easiest things that count don't really count. And the things that really count to people, we can't add up. So we have to be, and we've tried to deal with that very carefully. I think it's very well very well drafted report that doesn't overemphasise the charting and numbers, and has a very good balance with direct quotes from people. The other problem is that when you aggregate things, the unique and individual journeys of people and their personal paths get sort of lost. And we must never forget that most people, well, everyone really solves most of their own problems. And our role is to help people solve their problems. And it's not for us to quantify how they're solving their problems. It could be that their situation is worsening or improving. So we talk often, and we've heard the discussion about outcomes. Is the policies, is what the actions that we're doing, are they curative? Are they restorative? Are they ameliorative? It depends on each individual. And so this is about 720 or so, 712 individuals. And we've always got to privilege the individual experience and understand that it's that authentic experience that we are trying to help and support in what is the most difficult challenge that we've had as a council. And the whole organisation needs, I think, to learn from that personalising approach that we've got in the dedicated service.
Thank you, Barry. So I think at this point we'll move on to discussing the dedicated service. Elizabeth is going to introduce it, but I know we have Nabil Shukar at the back there who would like to speak. So perhaps if you would like to introduce the report on the dedicated service, Elizabeth, and then I'll get Nabil to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report provides an update on the review into the Grenfell dedicated service that's currently underway. The dedicated service provides personalised support to over 700 bereaved and survivors. And given the commitments we've made and indeed our obligations to this group, I want to make sure that the service works as effectively as possible for everyone who uses it. And back to Barry's point, that is every single individual who's being supported. The review is a key opportunity to hear how the service has been working to date and indeed how things can be improved. So the proposal for the review was agreed by the leadership team in May 2021, following a very useful and helpful discussion actually at this committee in March. It's been running since July, and it's in 2 phases. The first phase focused on hearing views directly from bereaved and survivors about their experience to date and about what their priorities are going forward. The second phase set out proposed plans to improve the service based on this feedback, and was an opportunity to make sure we'd heard the bereaved and survivors' views correctly, and just to make sure that we are double-checking that we're on the right track. The paper focuses on the first phase, focuses on the first phase, which concluded in early September. The second phase only concluded on Sunday, so the team is still looking at what we've heard. We heard from over 230 people in the first phase of the review, which is over 40% of those adults who are bereaved and survivors eligible for support. And I think we're so grateful for the time people took to complete the survey. As you can see the survey there, it's quite a long one. And you know, it's really a privilege to have this type of response. While the responses indicate that people are broadly happy with the service, we know there's much more we can do to improve it and for the service to evolve. But we want to ensure that we hear from everyone, and that does include those who did not respond. The improvements that we're planning to focus on are increasing the choice and control that bereaved and survivors have. That means sort of empowering them more, ensuring that support can be sufficiently targeted to those who need it the most, and indeed improving how we communicate with and involve bereaved and survivors in every aspect of the service. And I'm hopeful that the changes we make as a result of the review will go to a long way to addressing those issues which have been raised. And I've asked officers to bring the final proposal of the service to the leadership team meeting in December. And this will include a revised model for the service and a clear action plan following further communication about the plan with bereaved and survivors in late November. Any feedback provided by this committee will really help inform and improve these final plans, and I look forward to hearing your views this evening. And I want to stress that the bereaved and survivors will continue to be consulted and engaged with during the next phase, because their individual and collective voices will always and must always be paramount when considering how the service should change or evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now, Bill, would you like to speak? You should have a microphone in front of... Yes, that's fine.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Nabil Shuker. I'm part of the steering dedicated group and also part of Grenfell Tower Trust, who works with immediate next of kin bereaved families. About 2 years ago, just a bit more, I joined to be part of the steering group. 2 years ago, we requested that we wanted to see the steering group be developed so that we could have maximum funds or maximum benefit for each individual family so they can tailor their own needs to their own specifications for what they wanted. 2 years have moved on since then, and 4 months ago, roughly, or a bit more, I came here to request that the dedicated service really look at these funds being maximized so that each individual person or for his family can have the maximum benefit where they can use for the service to recuperate or to help themselves. They did this in a survey, which is very unfair in a way that, this survey, there is a lot of bereaved, there is a lot of survivors, there is a lot of, when I look at myself and my fault for my family. I know what's best for me and my family, like many other people know what's best for them and their family. We can't tailor for what each individual wants, but each individual person can tailor for what they want. Each individual, whether it be the mother or the father, they know what's best for their children. Now again, I come here and I request to see if we can help these families obtain the maximum budget. And when I say maximum budget, it's maximum help or budget that can allow the family to help their own family with the service that they know what's best, not what we know what could be best for them. Some people don't use key workers and they're having to pay for key workers. Some people use key workers sometime and they're still having to pay. We're all being, part of this, and it's not fair that the funds are not being used where they should be used. So I might not be here in 4 months' time when I come back, and that will only be because the system has failed and failed a lot of people. Now, I request again that you really look at the budget and look at helping and increasing each individual budget, maximizing so they can look at tailoring for their own family. And also, this is not compensation, which people might look at as compensation, but they know what's best for each individual family knows what's best for themselves. And this is not spending money. it is just something that they can spend or, use to help their family. Because, for example, I just want to give you a quick example, and I'm being very quick and brief. My daughter is doing GCSEs, and to get education, to get a private tutor now costs like £50 minimum, an hourly rate. Her budget can easily be swallowed within a couple of months of tutoring. Now, how can I help each individual child of mine when there's such a low budget, when it should be maximized to what it should be long time ago? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think, Elizabeth, would you like to answer that? Barry?
I'd like to start by thanking Nabil for coming tonight. And I think as I said, I mean, what we're hoping to find from this review is ways that we can improve and that the service will evolve. And although we can say, in looking at the figures, that the majority of people are happy with quite a lot of the service, there's always going to be room for improvement. I know that we have personalised plans for each family, and there is some budget, but I'm going to turn to Callum to ask him about the specifics about whether we will look at the individual budgets being increased, because of course within the strategy we did set an envelope, and we do need to, at the same time as allowing for each individual to be able to control what would help them the most, think collectively as well about what helps everyone the most. But Callum, perhaps you can carry on. But yeah, I'd like to say thank you for Nabil for coming and speaking tonight.
Callum.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell, and thank you, Nabil, for those comments, which I know we have discussed many times in the steering group and many times separately. And I recognise that you have come here before, and we're keen to try and make sure that we can find a way that works for you as works for others as well going forwards. In terms of the specifics of your response, I think it's important to recognise in beginning of this financial year, we really did try and take on yours and other members of the steering group, and indeed many other bereavement survivors who I know feel very similarly to how you've spoken tonight, have tried to take on your feedback and your challenge in terms of trying to increase choice and control, and trying to ensure that bereavement survivors themselves are giving as much freedom and understanding and flexibility, because I agree with you entirely. You know what's right for you and you know what you need, and our job is to try and provide a facilitative framework that allows you to access that support in a way that sort of utilises best practice and that allows us to comply with our legal jurisdictions as well in terms of how money can be used. Now, as a result of that, I recognise that it may not go as far as you would have wanted, but as a result of that, we did double the individual service budgets going into this financial year, which means that at this current moment, 1/3 of the entire service budget has, and some of which isn't spent in year because we've been trying to save, but a third of the budget is available for individual services overall, and individual services is our general approach to trying to respond to the criticism and the challenge and the problem of trying to provide choice and control to a community who've been affected through one singular tragedy, but often in so many different ways. I think where we are looking forwards, I'm very happy to agree here in the committee that we will continue those conversations in terms of thinking about how we can look at budgets going forwards and flex and utilise the flexibility that we have. I know that we have a steering group meeting that we've promised you and others coming up in the next month or so to agree the budget for the coming year, and I will make sure that I have the comments that you've raised so eloquently tonight in my mind and ears in the run-up to that conversation, and of course in the conversation itself. we do have some flexibility in the sense that we have, again, tried to take on your steer and the steer of many others to try and ensure that the money that we have at our disposal is spent in the most effective and efficient way as possible that places your needs at the centre of those decisions. As a result of that, for example, we no longer spend the money that we used to spend on providing building and meeting space, and that gives us some flexibility going into the future financial years. And we are, as we've been discussing, looking at how we can personalise and create more flexibility through our commissioning budget as well, again, to give you a better framework to be able to make decisions that work for you. So essentially, I thank you for the challenge, and we will continue to work, and I hope that we can get closer to where you would like us to be in terms of providing you with the flexibility that you need.
Thank you, Callum. Marwan would like to comment.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much, Nabil, for sharing this case and being open with us on this. And thanks, Colin, for your commitment on this, setting a priority on a specific case. But how would you say, how many will be like in Nabil cases? For example, a person reach a GCSE stage. It's at the really turning point of that child's life, and I know that child lost loved ones, her grandma and auntie and so on, and going back, and I know that they left the school and they were, as a teacher, I know how this impacting later in terms of their academic achievement. So I hope cases like this, it's not just a conversation to be continued, but a commitment and a priority to be set within a very specific timescale framework, because GCSE very soon, and it's a very simple request, I believe. So how many families like this as well, you might say, can be sorted on a priority basis along this time constraints? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We agree completely that it's a vitally important area, and when we set up the dedicated service, we made sure to have an educational department, if you like. Department is a big word for 3 people, who are able to both deliver and coordinate educational support to bereaved survivors. Initially, that started with the ability to have focused additional sessions, as well as trying to coordinate and work with our colleagues in the Children's Services and the Grenfell Education Fund to pull in specific support and create specific packages for children when they were in need. We have heard from quite a few families and reflected through the review, however, about the importance to enhance that support. And so last year within COVID, we put together a sort of education for recovery package that had specific educational support available to children of all different age brackets. So support for children in GCSE years, for example, was different for children in year 3. But the funding was provided directly to parents, along with the suggestion of things that they might be able to use that for, including tutoring. Now, in addition to that, since we've also recognised that we can still go further. So this academic year, we've started a series of after-school clubs that are educational focused, and again utilise quality trauma-informed tutors who often now are working at sort of a 1-to-2, 1-to-3 ratio for, again, children in different age brackets, and we have a hub in both the north and the south of the borough. But additionally, we have heard Mr. Chuker's challenge and other members of the community to think more about what we could be doing in a blanket case for children who are coming up to those key moments in life, like GCSEs, like A-levels. And I know I'm expecting from my education lead tomorrow a first draft of a paper that will set out a proposal that will allow us to provide additional targeted support, funding specifically for additional tuition for children who are in GCSE and A-level years, and we are looking to see, we will be putting some of the money from the Grenfell Dedicated Service funds into that, and we're looking to enhance that and strengthen that with funding from other sources as well. And we're looking to future-proof that so that we don't have situations like Mr. Chakere finds himself in now, where children are coming of age and having to ask, and instead it's a blanket offer that they know when their child gets to that age, within the confines of our delivery period until 2024, they will be able to access that support. And we have about 10 to 12 on average children at the moment who are doing A-levels, the old AS, year 11 and year 10. So we have a few children who are coming up now to this period. I think just by chance, the age profile of the children of the bereaved and survivors, we haven't had that many over the last few years, but now it's becoming a sort of key thing that we really need to make sure that we resolve.
I'll take Mo and then I'll come to you, Kazim. Okay, Mo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for coming, Nabil. You have raised the same point back in July. Was it June or July? Council meeting. You've addressed the council, and I have supported you then. And I think what you are saying now, first of all, it's common sense. This is how it should be. Second, what you have claimed contradicts what's in the report. In the report it says in the services we are helping children, students, whatever. Now we have Nabil worried to provide extra tuitions for his children. This is very worrying. And we had a motion. I personally asked, because I think we need to cut the middleman. We need to provide the services to the user directly. And I think this is the best way. Extra tuition we might have 50 or 60 children in the borough. They need direct help. If we pay them 2 hours a week, that will make a huge difference to raise their education level, academic level, and they do better. And as Marwan mentioned earlier, we can't wait for the financial year, which is April. This is 6 months from now. The student and this child will lose out 6 months, and they will lose the chance to raise their academic level. I think this needs to be addressed now, tonight. Thank you.
Elizabeth.
Can I just come back? I absolutely accept what Nabil has had to say tonight, but I guess it's what the rest of the steering group feel and the rest of the bereaved and survivors, because of course it's not an individual decision, is it? It's what everyone wants to do with the money. So perhaps we should, and I think that's what you're doing at the moment, is asking bereaved and survivors how they want the service to evolve. And I suppose if everyone agrees, that would be something that one would consider. But we're trying to talk to 700 people. So we have to think about everyone in the round.
Callum, do you want to? I'm going to call in Kazim next, but Callum.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. But just to address your concerns, Councillor, I think it's important just to stress I can completely understand Nabil's comments and why we have to make sure that it's always important to hear from the individual, from the collective, and it provides nuance to the paper and the work that we've been doing, because it allows you as a committee to be able to see the reality. The service, people are telling us generally in the service that they are broadly happy, but that doesn't mean everything is perfect. And that doesn't mean people aren't continuing to suffer in different ways. And we view it as a clear and honest and true commitment that we will always work to improve our practice to support people better. But I think just to try and alleviate your concern slightly, every child now has their own individual budget that they have access to now and they've had access to for the last few years, that they could use if they wanted to for additional educational support. I take the point that's been raised by Mr. Chakere, that there are often very many competing priorities about how people want to use that money, but I just want to make sure that you're assured, at least to that extent, that every child within the bereaved and survivor, as every adult, does have a fund available to them today.
Thank you. I'm going to call Nabil in again and then come to Kazim. So, Nabil.
Thank you. Thank you very much, councillors. I appreciate what you're saying. I want to try and simplify it and make it very simple. If if we can look at a maximum budget where one can have a maximum budget whether it be, for example, I don't know, for argument's sake, whether it's 4,000 or 5,000, whatever, where he doesn't need to use, because I don't want to use the community service. I don't want to use any other service. I want to use my own service where I know what's best for myself and what's best for my family, like many other people know what's best for their family. And I can't wait for come April where we have to beginning of tax year, whatever, you know, where it gets looked at and done. We need to have this right away now, because some of us won't be here. Some of us really needs the help right now. 2 years we've been asking for this. 4 months ago I asked for this. It's been ongoing continuously. We can't have it looked at survey after survey. We really need the help now, and I'm trying to do it through families, on behalf of families and everybody else. If you can set if an example can be done where one can be given or offered it, I'm guarantee you everybody would turn around and say, I want that, I don't want a community service, I don't want any other service. I'd rather look at my own individual services now and help now for my family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nabil, for coming again, and I'm sorry that you had to come back for the same issue once again into the meeting for the scrutiny meeting. In terms of what you have raised, I understand when services are being used, one's need is different from others, and you cannot rely on others to agree with your needs, specific needs for your child and for yourself. Having said that, I would like to ask Callum, if you could give us, without of course specifically talking about the individual cases, but what is a rough estimate for budget allocated for children to have a tuition or any other service within that area? And another question for you specifically, how come someone who needs extra tuition for, let's say, maths or chemistry or physics or whatever that subject may be, but others are excellent on that field, that is unequal in terms of the need of the individual, of the people? How can you deal with, or how can you navigate? Because the answer cannot be you have to go back to the service where everyone has to agree, because everyone's need is different. Could you please respond to that too?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So I think on the first point, in terms of budget allocation, if you like, both in terms of general and in terms of educational allocation, I can delve into that a little. More detail will be discussed at the joint meeting that Councillor Rossi pointed to on the 22nd, where we'll look at this paper alongside the paper on spend. But roughly, we have a £4.5 million budget for the dedicated service on a year-on-year. Some of that money is retained for future years. That's been asked for us to do that by bereaved survivors, so there's not a cliff edge in 2024. But we spend, a decent proportion of that amount of money. £1.5 million is available through what we call individual services, which are essentially ring-fenced personal budgets for each adult and each child accessing the support. There's slightly more money per child than there is per adult. And that money is accessible through what we call prepaid cards, and as long as the request is in line with their support needs, money is loaded onto their card and they're able to purchase specific support that's specific for themselves. Alongside that, we have at the moment a £500,000 roughly central commissioning budget, which I think is what Nabil was alluding to in his last point. Through that initiative, historically, we have commissioned specific organisations to deliver support to all bereavement survivors. So, for example, we commissioned a very popular alternative therapies provider that's provided lots of people with respite and support. And also we've commissioned things like Citizens Advice Bureau to provide additional advocacy and advice support to the bereavement survivor community. We are, through the survey, we asked people about whether they wanted us to continue to commission services centrally, and we got an interesting set of feedback. We thought perhaps that everyone would agree with the bill and would say that they didn't want us to commission services centrally anymore, but the answer that we got back was slightly more nuanced. People, I think, did value some of the support that we've commissioned centrally because, well, that's what they've said, but they've also still wanted us to have more choice and control. So what we're looking to try and explore is how we can personalise as much of that budget as possible through this review, so that rather than us commissioning a single provider and telling people that they have to access the support through that provider, they will be able to have access to funds and be able to provide access to use that money to purchase support from a pool of providers that deliver a particular type of support. So it won't be quite as flexible as individual services that could be more or less used on anything that's specific to someone's support needs, but it will be, for example, they could use it for any therapeutic support or any well-being support, and that will give people additional choice and control, and I hope will go some way to addressing some of the challenge we've heard tonight. At the same time, historically, we have spent around about £500,000 on building costs, which has drawn criticism fairly from bereaved survivors who aren't here tonight. And through a survey that we did previously earlier in the year, we have left that premises and we are no longer spending that money. Some of the residual costs of the rent are still included in this year, but we essentially have a good degree of flexibility of how we can use that money going into the next financial year, where our liabilities end in terms of the arrangements that we've had historically. And lastly, we spend money on what we call operational costs, which is anything from translation to case management systems, but most importantly staff, and the provision of dedicated service workers, along with an ever shrinking management team as we try and be as efficient as we can be. The dedicated service workers themselves is a really important role, and actually through the survey we heard very loudly and clearly that the majority of people really value the support from a dedicated service worker, but again, we should and could be doing more to be making sure that the work they provide and the support they provide to each individual is what I would call hyper-personalised, is dealing with the individual or family's specific needs. So it's not that you get a one singular homogenous offer from each of the workers, but instead the worker is able to tailor their support to your specific needs. So although it's not cashable, so to say, it's a personalised support offer where you utilise the support you need from an individual. Through all of that, we have educational spend through individual services, which is the 1.5. A proportion at the moment of the £500,000 that we spend on commission services goes to education, and within our staff base, we have 3 officers who are educationalists, if you like, as well as a COVID funded, so funded separately from that budget, top up for tuition and wider support. In terms of your second question about how we therefore make sure that we deliver specific and different services based on someone's specific and individual needs, we try and use all 4 of those different mechanisms to try and ensure that we do that. So, for example, the educational officers that we have in our team, for some people they will be providing specific maths support. So sometimes they're providing specific support to kids in primary school who are really struggling to develop and feel comfortable at school. Sometimes they're providing literally one-on-one English support at their home. So it very much, we use our staff and the funds that we have both to enable people to choose support that's right for them and to deliver targeted support.
Could I ask perhaps if we could look at these individual budgets as a matter of urgency and see? I mean, I hear what you're saying, Callum, but I also hear what Nabil's saying, and I think maybe it's something we could actually look at now. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I just want a follow-up question, if you don't mind. Quick one. Thank you. You've mentioned and you've given a comprehensive answer, so thank you. If you would make it short next time, we'll appreciate it. I know you're experts in that field. In terms of the tuition service you provide, is it the money that's being provided, or the actual tuition tutors are coming for hours and maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, and then they have a limit of, let's say, £50 limit for that week? Can you just educate us on that front, please?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. It's different for different initiatives. So, for example, in the after-school clubs that we now run 4 days a week, they are specific. You come and you access support from specific tutors that we've commissioned from an organisation that we believe do fantastic work with traumatised children and young people. So there you will access support from a tutor, but again, those tutors are age-specific and subject-specific depending on your need. Historically, we've had the Education for Recovery Fund, which gives money to children of the relevant age where tuition would be of value. Alongside that, my staff work hand in glove with our educational colleagues to access the Grenfell Education Fund, which is separate from the dedicated service budget, and that again is money for tuition that families can then use as they see fit. And the initiative that we're putting in place imminently for GCSE and A levels again is money that families will be able to use as they see fit. So it's a combination. If that answers your point.
You have, but how can we deal with why Nabil is here this evening?
Not to be drawn into the specific cases, some of the support that we're providing individuals are accessing. That doesn't mean that it's all working as effectively. And I think the specific point that Nabil raised about additional support for his daughter who's in GCSE year is the area of the answer that I've just given that is not yet in place.
Yeah, an adaptation so you can adapt and hopefully...
That's why we're putting this arrangement in place.
Thank you.
Now.
That will do. And hopefully if we can have a report maybe the next meeting, I would appreciate to show the adaptability for your program. But thank you once again for the work you do.
Janet.
Thank you, Nabil, for bringing the issue to us. Kalam, is there any way we could speed up the process? Because I understand it from what you're saying that there is support there. The question is if a child comes home, has their exams, they need the tuition quickly. How can you talk us through what the process is? How can you get it expedited, not getting caught up in bureaucracy so that the child can actually have the tutor since you have the support? Or do you have, since you do have tutors for younger children, do you have some GCSE and A-level tutors available that you could just provide the source straight to the applicant?
Yep. I think you need to. Yes. So next week, a person could take their child to one of the 4 after-school clubs and access tuition 4 days a week. So that's ready now. In terms of the additional support we're putting in place for exam level children, I'm hopeful that we'll have that in place by December. So that isn't waiting for the next financial year when budgets top up. There is fundamental realities that some families will have already used their own individual services and the budget that's given to them in a fair and equal way and given to everyone, which doesn't replenish until the end of the year. And we do sometimes see that there are challenges where people have utilised their funds earlier in the year and yet are faced with additional need. And there, we do try and work collaboratively with the schools as well, because I think they are a key part of the provision of educating children. But along with some of the other commissioned arrangements we put in place. So I feel that there is support available now, but there's always more we can do.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Going to ask Nabil wishes to comment again.
Thank you, and thank you. I'll be very quick and brief. Kind of gone blank now, sorry. Basically, looking at having it, I used education as a small example. It's more of an increase because for the families to select their specific services, and some of them, I guarantee you, might not be here next year. So it's trying to make most of the time up for them so they can help with their own specific services. And each individual service, we really need it now, not later. And I really emphasize not tax year, and we shouldn't have to wait, try and set an example, and I guarantee you everybody will follow and would want that example because they all want the best for themselves and their families. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think we understand that it has to be looked at urgently, and I think that has been agreed. So, Councillor Attenborough.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nabil, for coming this evening. I'd just like to say that I really welcome this review, the 2 reviews. I think, they're so important because this service has to evolve and change with need, which we're hearing tonight. And I appreciate that it's too early for you to give us any feedback on the latest review. One of my comments that I found it's quite, I'm not sure how accessible it is to everybody. I don't know whether you've had any feedback on that. So I don't know whether you'd get more responses if it perhaps wasn't quite so big. That's just one thing. And so could you let us know when you think you will get the results of this survey, this review, and how this will be communicated back to the bereaved and survivors?
Yes, of course. And thank you, Councillor. In terms of the length of the survey itself, which I know is included in one of the appendices of the papers, it is a long survey, I would acknowledge that. We have tried, in terms of accessibility, a few things that I think have worked to varying degrees of success. Most importantly, the survey itself was available in 9 languages. It was sent to every bereaved survivor to their house, both in English and, if they spoke a different language, in the language of their in their preferred language. Again, we also sent it out via email, and there was an online version of it available, again, in the 9 different languages. 170 people completed the full survey response, and alongside that, though, we had a smaller number of people who completed what we call a sort of shorter version of the survey, because we did hear from bereaved survivors, and we know that some people really are put off by completing forms. It reminds them, I believe, of the early days where they were having to tell their story and complete lots of paperwork, and we try to be as mindful as we can about that. And so through that shorter form, people are able to call up and answer some of these questions over the phone, either through people in the dedicated service, or if they felt like they wanted someone one step removed, there was an independent organisation they could speak to as well. We saw that was pretty effective too. Outside of the numbers that we've quoted here, we also held a number of online and face-to-face workshops, both in sort of general locations and in locations where we know there are a number of bereaved survivors living. I think that proved quite a helpful mechanism for one, dealing with any concerns that people might have had about anxiety about completing such a long survey, but also actually being able to provide sort of short snippets of feedback at the same time. I think in truth, one of the other points it's important to raise, we've done a few surveys with bereaved survivors, is also it's about the nature of the questions that were asked. So I think what we found in previous surveys is we didn't get anywhere near the same level of results. And I think what we tried to do, and again we could always do better, but it's something that we feel we have learnt, is it's important that a survey is meaningful to people and that they can see the difference completing the survey either has, whether depending on what feedback people give. So I think that has led to more people completing the survey this time around. In terms of the results, published also within the papers was our first set of results, a summary of the results, which is you said we are planning on document. Again, this has been made available online in 9 different languages and sent to people. Alongside that, we've actually got a 60-page consultation analysis available to all bereaved survivors, so people can see, don't have to rely on our analysis of the detail, but they can see all of it themselves if they so choose to, which is available on the dedicated service website that's specifically accessible only to bereaved survivors. We are just about to, next week, meet with the steering group to run through the final set of plans that have come out of the second phase, and we will be, once we've had a conversation and hopefully come to agreement with the steering group, we'll be sending that round again to all bereaved survivors so they can see the plans and the changes that we will be making as a result of their feedback in the coming weeks. before we come back to the leadership team in the 8th of December to seek their endorsement and agreement on the plans before we then spend a fair few months delivering the changes that people have requested.
Sarah.
Thank you, Callum. And just, you know I worry about this, and you touched on it briefly, but what are we going to do to avoid that cliff edge at the end of the 5 years?
Yeah, it's an important question, specifically now as we can see the timelines of the inquiry and decisions around the tower no longer fall within the time frame of the recovery programme that we'd once hoped would. So we asked a question in the survey because it's a really tricky balance, because as we've heard tonight, people have needs now and they want those needs addressed now, but at the same time we are aware that the fact that all of those needs aren't going to have disappeared by 2024. So we got a really overwhelmingly positive response to the question of making sure that we run the service as efficiently as possible and put whatever money we can aside into a ring-fence pot that bereaved survivors, again, will be consulted on in 2023, most likely, about how they want to use the money that we've been able to save to provide ongoing support. And depending on the model that they choose at that moment, I would be confident that we'll be able to deliver a form of service, not as it is now, but a form of service, at least in 24-25 and potentially a part of 25-26.
Thank you. So I have one question here from Councillor Hammond. It's about the turnout for the consultation, which is 62% households, 40% of individuals. And I think that the question is really, do we know why quite a few people didn't respond? And do we know, are there certain groups or why they didn't? Or do you know anything about the ones that didn't respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a funny situation. We to some extent are pleased with that level of response, because it's not always, even in any normal context, the most attractive concept of completing a survey with your local council, in truth, and most specifically when it's of this particular nature and given the position that the council found itself in. So to some extent we think that response rate is pretty good, but there's always more we can do to try and hear and find out the feedback from bereaved survivors. And we will continue to attempt to do that, whether that's through individual workers and that feedback coming directly through them, or whether it be through the complaints route or any other process, like we have monthly audits that happen as well. In terms of who responded, we have done some additional analysis to make sure that no specific group was over or underrepresented. So we've got sort of very broadly, the same levels of response rates from bereaved families as we do from survivors, as we do from Grenfell Walk residents, as we do for people who live in borough and out of borough. So we aren't specifically concerned that the survey disproportionately represents or excludes any particular group.
Thank you. Nabil, I'll give the final say to you.
Thank you. Is it possible that because in the first year or two a big portion of running the service went to wages and also the building, could we not look at, because if the families, the bereaved and the survivors are at the heart of this, can we not look at supporting them in the long run by either taking from the community fund, some from the community fund, to extend for the bereaved and the survivors, because of what's going to be happening in the future, because of justice and everything else. They're going to be going through more ordeals and everything else. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we all take your point. So thank you very much for coming here tonight, Nabil, and for sharing your concerns with us. And I'd also like to say thank you to Callum and Joe for producing this report. And I look forward, we're discussing it again on the 22nd, so I look forward to that. So thank you both. And now we will move on to the next, which is A6, which is the budget report. So thank you, everyone. So this is the update on the medium-term financial plan. I don't know, Taryn or Mary, if you would like to say something about the budget.
Can I just do a little quick introduction?
You may.
So I'm really not very much because first of all, to apologise, there are no page numbers at the bottom of the report, which I consider to be very confusing. But anyway, just a few introductory comments. This is really the sort of beginning, the kick-off of the sort of the next stage, really. I mean, we're in a budget preparation stage almost all year, really. But this is the stage we've got to when we've got something ready to go out to consultation on both the revenue and the capital programme. And the result of all of this and the suggestions and what happens over the next 6 months obviously culminates in a budget to be recommended to the Council in March. Following the sort of update to the medium-term financial strategy is that there's been a small increase in the budget gap because our assumptions, obviously, inflation and everything else have changed, up to 7.8 million for 22-23. If all the budget proposals are agreed and everyone's happy with them that are in this report, there'll remain a budget gap of about 2 million. And if we increase our council tax by 2%, that should cover that 2 million. It'll generate enough income. If there's no increase in council tax, additional savings will need to be found in addition to the ones in this paper. Also, as part of the process, because it has revenue implications, the current capital programme has been reviewed and 4.8 million pounds worth of suggestions are deleted from the programme, and a further nearly 23 million have been moved into the pipeline and therefore don't require to be funded or for us to budget for their funding for the time being. But there have also been requests for new investment of nearly 19 million, and they've been put forward for inclusion, and also 28 million for the capital pipeline. What we need to bear in mind is that if we agree when we achieve a balanced budget for next year, there will remain a budget gap of 22 million for the 3 following years. And that's without taking into account, as I keep harping on, any fairer funding or levelling up implications for the borough. That's all I've got to say in introduction.
Thank you, Mary. Taryn, do you want to say anything, or you'll just answer questions? So I am looking around. I seem to be the only person from the budget working group here tonight, so I have to say something that basically I think we're doing most of our scrutiny through the budget working group. And what's planned next, and I don't know if we've got dates yet, but we are having individual meetings with lead members in each department, and I think we will invite everyone who is not on the budget working group. I mean, certainly the select committee chairs will want to go to their budget, on their budget area, but I think the rest of the committee will also, I think it's very, very useful, and I think if people have got the time, it's well worth attending. So I was just going to start with something that I'm actually concerned about, which is a very general point, is inflation. We're not used to inflation going up, but that might happen now. And I mean, you know, I'm not an economist, but I think maybe interest rates might start to go up as well. So things like when we're committed and the cost of borrowing and just inflation generally, have you sort of factored that in to what might happen, maybe not in the next year, but in the years to come?
I'll ask Taryn to fill in more of the detail, but yes, I mean, these are some of the things that get adjusted along the way as the budget progresses. It's also worth noting that an increase in interest rates isn't necessarily overwhelmingly bad for us, because we have investments
and so on. And we've also done quite a lot of forward borrowing at low interest rates to fund our capital programme, although we have stopped forward borrowing because apart from anything else we've reviewed our requirements and tried to reduce our capital spend. But I think those two strands at least put us in a reasonable position, but I'm sure Taran's got much more sensible things to say than I have.
Oh, not necessarily. So financial plans do currently assume an inflation rate of 2%. Now we know we're in uncertain times, it is a risk. I think looking at the Office for Budget Responsibility, their kind of longer term forecast over the next 3 years, the expectation that it will remain in line with the 2%, but it is something that we're keeping a very watchful eye on, particularly over the next 12 months. And the one in particular that is much more of a risk, as I say, is around obviously inflation rates on fuel and energy costs. So we haven't yet. We've got a corporate provision for inflation. I think that would allow us to. We've done some estimates on what the inflation might be on fuel and our utility bills, and there is enough provision within the financial plans at the moment. But it is something that we'll just need to keep an eye on. I mean, this is the very start of the budget process. It won't be finalised until it comes up to Budget Council in March. We will keep those monthly forecasts under our radar to see whether there is something we need to build in for next year's budget. But certainly beyond next year, we are at the moment forecasting it will remain in line with the 2% inflation target. But it is a risk, and I think it's a risk that we need to keep an eye on.
Taryn, questions? Councillor Addenbrooke.
Well, we've seen the increase in the national living wage, but they did not mention the London living wage, and I just wonder if that's something we need to consider going forward. I mean, we don't know what it's going to be, obviously, but it would impact us.
I'm just going to say that, I mean, I think there's an assumption that it'll increase in step, and I think they're pretty much in lockstep conceptually, aren't they? And so, yes, that's, again, another factor to be taken into account, but it is on the radar. So all these things are quite frightening, but they are at least mostly, I hope, being thought about and considered.
Mo.
Thank you. We will have a shortfall of 7.8 million, I think, the figure. But you say where the rest of the money will come, because you said if we increase the council tax by 2%, that should cover the shortfall.
Yes. So 2 million is the shortfall. So that's if we take all the savings that are suggested in Appendix A, that will bring us from 7.8 million of deficit to 2 million of deficit. So and the savings combined with the suggested 2% or the potential 2% increase in council tax would balance the budget.
And by doing this, we will keep the same level of services we are providing.
Well, that's what we hope will be consider will be the case. Yes, I mean, if you look at I'm sure you've examined the individual proposals, and I'm not sure that, as far as I'm concerned, there's no deleterious effect on our services. But of course, that's for you to scrutinise.
Okay, thank you.
Janet.
Mary, I seem to recall about 2 years ago we did adjust salaries, didn't we, to the London living wage? Remember yes, so I think that was already accounted for.
It is in essence, but it's been a gradual process. As contracts have come up for renewal, we've started specifying the London living wage. We didn't sort of backdate it to existing contracts. Obviously, all our own staff that were on the living wage were upgraded to the London living wage, but with the contracts it's taken more to come out in the wash. I think the question that was being raised was that given that the minimum wage had been increased, was the London living wage, which we have now committed to paying, also going to increase and have cost implications for us? And the answer to that is yes, but it's on our radar.
Ali, and then Councillor Pascal.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. We we know that the difficulties we are going through in terms of the budget and the finance in general, and the effect of the Brexit as well as COVID. Having said that, I think there is a more pressing issue here on 1.6, the population figures that although we do not know the 2021 census, but it shows that it will come in May 2022 or June, and that will show the reduction of Kensington and Chelsea population, which will directly have an effect of the government's funding levels and the money that we can get to provide the services, some of the services we do provide in terms of security and education. If we just go back a little bit in terms of the population increase of the country as a whole and London in general, and then we come down to RBKC, the population of the UK in 2011 was 63,260,000. Today, this year, is 68,370,281. That's almost more than 5 million increase in general. But in London, it was interesting. The population of in 2011 was 8,134,000, but compared to this year, 10 years later, it's 9,425,622. That's a net increase of 1,291,622. In RBKC, the figures are slightly different, and this is a trend that has been happening. In 2011, we have 158,649 great citizens of our borough, but we don't know the figures, and that will have an effect on us. What is causing this reduction, unlike the whole country and in London, but RBKC, which will have not only the job creation, as well as funding from the government? What is it causing? And is it about time, maybe you may not answer this question, but I think it's relevant to ask, is it about time for us to think sending residents who maybe need to outside of the borough to make sure that we have a leveled number of population, rather than decreasing it every 10 years or every few years? We can keep the number of people we have in our borough, and why is it the only borough in London, or maybe the whole country, that has population decreased? Thank you.
I'm the sort of resident demographer here. I do think that you raise really an important point about the differential impact of demographic change across the country. Certainly London's growth may well have stalled in the past 2 years. We really don't know. We won't know for a couple of months, really. And all the numbers that you're referring to are numbers by ONS that's been based on previous assessments and what their judgments about migration. And there's lots of people currently contesting, particularly the migration figures. Famously, Jonathan Porter's suggests that the international movement is overestimated. And so we're not really sure. Most of London's growth really comes from migration rather than, and that's net international migration, as well as net migration from the rest of the country to London. And so domestic migration is quite important. The average age of coming to London is 28. The average age of leaving is 39. It's sort of, we have a very young 20, 30-something population coming for work and then going elsewhere. Generally, the suburbanising trend of people coming to the centre and then moving out as their life cycle stages change, that's also probably been disrupted by housing costs as well. And so until they release the London figures and how we can then, that's the census for 2021, then we're not really sure whether London's population has stalled or not. I was talking to Tony, I was talking to a demographer the other day from the LSE about this issue, and they're really waiting with bated breath to see what this means. The issue about why is Kensington and Chelsea a flat profile rather than increasing or decreasing? Well, rather than increasing like the rest of London, is to do with the fact we start with very high population density anyway. We also have a very highly atypical tenure. So entry into Kensington and Chelsea is a very high bar. Remember that the majority, although a third of people live in social housing, 2/3 don't. And the 2/3 that don't live in properties that last year was sold on average for 2.2 million. Therefore, it's a high bar to get in, and therefore there's much less movement, and it's more, I think, as an authority, we need to think about how asset price changes is affecting lots of things in this borough, not just demand for planning, demand for development, but actually what it's doing for other demands, like for primary schools, secondary, and so on, because it's undoubtedly the case that for a few years, investment, particularly foreign investment into London property, and foreign investment into central London properties, super prime London, it would be known as, that investment was really a foreign investment that then hollowed out our population to some extent, because people were buying the asset but not necessarily moving in, or buying the asset, moving in, but actually moving in for part of the year. And so our population is very much tied to this very atypical tenure, but very high population density. So we're not really comparable with, I mean, I think the average price in Westminster is virtually £1 million less than Kensington and Chelsea. And it's certainly much, I mean, I think for London it's probably about 500,000, so we're 4 times as much. We have the highest ratio of median earnings and median house price in the whole of the country by a long way. So when this was just reported by ONS, I think it was covered in the FT last week, it basically shows how atypical it is. And demography, people go to where they can afford to go. They leave in order to go to somewhere more affordable. And so I think the issue for us is how we and the other authorities can make London more affordable. Also how I think that the latter part of your question, which was really about, is it feasible for us to help people get housed somewhere else? I think that is a quite important question for London, because London authorities, because the homelessness legislation applies to individual authorities, it applies to 32 individual authorities. It doesn't apply to London as a whole. And therefore, what happens is these individual authorities are trying to solve their housing problems locally. Yeah. Well, when I lived in council housing as a child and we were rehoused somewhere else, we were rehoused across the river into Bethnal Green. And then we were rehoused back again south of the river. So there was much, and that's because at the time, half of the local authority housing stock in London was owned by the Greater London Council. And when it was abolished, it moved its stock into local authorities, and now what was, it used to enable, for the 25 years it existed, the GOC, movement of people who were dependent on social housing. It enabled that movement across London. That movement is much less now.
Can I just add something to that, Barry? That in my ward, we used to have 25% EU nationals. And I think Brexit might have had an effect too on people leaving this borough. I shouldn't say that, but I think it might have done.
Yeah, I think there is an issue about whether what's happening to this population, is it the lower income populations that have left? Is it the higher income? Is it across the range? I think we don't know that at the moment. I would think that we're more impacted by the high income French American actually not being here, more so than London is by low income households moving, that are EU nationals.
Just follow up one more question. I think in terms of, if we were to explain an average resident in the borough to say we've been, the population of our borough have been declining for a number of years. If we go back to the figures we have from 2011, and it's declining flat. It's when it stays the same, but it's numbers we have up to 6,000 almost. One quotation is given, but we will find out. But it's been declining. It's official. And how can we have a declining population? Well, we also have the second highest tenants outside of the borough. This is again comes back to housing. It comes back to the affordability. So isn't that about time to think about having the second highest population out of the borough in TA, temporary accommodations, while we have a declining population in our BKC? Is it empty homes? What is the problem? There must be a solution for what's been happening for the last 10 years, and I think those are legitimate questions people will have to answer when it comes to the leading this borough. Thank you.
Arwen, and then Will.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. It's quite, as you said, this preliminary initial stages, which I like further maybe insight later, especially in my domain, adult social care and health. But on your points on the transitions program, you have a range of standard formation regarding efficiency and effectiveness for council services. How this is budgeted for, these programs? The transitions programs.
So was the question around the budget for the transitions program? Yeah. So the transitions program is a fairly new program, so it's being developed at this stage. So at the moment there are no savings within the plans that you see on the table tonight. That's really about how we're going to address. So Mary's touched on, you know, the estimated 22 million financial challenge that we've got for the 3 years that follow. So there's no budget as such. So that program is around looking at the way we do things, our processes, our procedures, our staffing, around our customer access, so our customer access strategy, our procurement and commissioning arrangements, all of which, as part of that review process, we are anticipating that there will be some reductions that will fall out of that. They haven't yet been quantified, they're not within the paper here. That work isn't ongoing at the moment, but it's likely to be from 2023 onwards, as opposed to the 2022 budget.
What the anticipated cost for this transition? Is there any anticipated cost?
Sure. So, I mean, it's made up of the 8 individual work streams. There are some small costs to deliver some of these kind of work streams and programs. I haven't got the exact figures, but I think it's a really good question. It's very, very minimal at this stage. There's some initial cost around delivering the customer access strategy is the main one at this stage. But I think it's a really good question, and we can feed that into the budget working group in terms of the costs incurred at this stage and any other almost pump priming implementation costs that might be associated with the programme.
If I can just add something there. I mean, if you look at something like delivering value through contracts and commissioning, we've sort of done quite a lot of the groundwork for doing that by introducing a procurement strategy and a procurement team. So those are already in our baseline budgets. And again, there might be a little bit more spending in that we need to update the software to handle our contracts. But fundamentally, the groundwork is there for us to now move forward and to make some savings off the back of them.
Will, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is quite a simple, straightforward one. Is there sufficient financial provision to enable the Council to achieve its 2030 carbon zero commitment for all its activities? And since 90% of this is its building stock, does it cover specifically the Council housing stock programme that's started, both new and in terms of renovations? Because the commissioning for that has already started. And if this has not been sufficiently provided for, is this risk factor sufficiently flagged for the audit information for this year?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pascoe. In terms of what we've assumed in financial plans at this stage, so within our capital programme there is a 10 million green fund that is within our capital programme, of which £1 million each year. There is some funding within the HRA business plan, but I think it's fairly true to say that in terms of meeting our commitment for 2030 in particular, there probably isn't sufficient within financial plans at this stage. However, it is something that's on our radar. It's something that we need to be considering. It's one of our links into our council plan priorities. So that work is underway. So I think it is fair to say that not the provision for all of meeting 2030 net zero isn't within financial plans, but it's very much on our radar. So I think it's a really good conversation to have as part of the budget. It's flagged as a risk at this stage, but we need to get quite close over the next few months to quantifying what some of that might look like.
If I could, Madam Chair, come back. Because as I understand it, the requirement that's been identified is of the order of 10 times that amount. In other words, in the order of £100 million, and that if we don't achieve the funding of that, the risk needs to be identified in the risk register of that order, and that that also needs to be reflected in our audit return for this year. So that is the question there. I think that the driving force behind the commitment to 2030 was to get our housing stock into a position that it would be able to support the national programme for carbon zero, and that there are also risks that if, like private landlords, that the investments are not made in time, that the government is now threatening to make conditions with regard to properties to be able to be let by landlords.
So just to add, so I know there is, in terms of obviously you've quoted that the estimated cost is probably 10 times the 10 million that we've got assumed in plans. The detailed work is underway by officers at this stage, so I think once we're clear on what those financial implications are, there needs to be a conversation in terms of what that looks like in terms of funding going forward.
There is an attendant risk also that if the commitment required that I think it's 9,000 social housing stock that we have to be done within a period of 10 years. We're now 2 years into that, so the cadence rate or number of houses per annum goes up as we don't do the job each year. And with the constraints on the building industry that are around at the moment, it's going to become increasingly difficult to catch up the rate that we're going to have to achieve per annum, which will be obviously same number of houses, smaller number of years. It's fairly basic logarithmic maths, and it will have influence on the cost that the council is able to get these units done at, and the capacity for commissioning within the council too would be difficult. So this is not one site or one row of houses. This is a complex group of low-rise and medium-rise housing with different construction techniques that they're built from. So the problem gets disproportionately difficult if we try to compress it into a smaller number of years, and the result of that will be increased cost per unit as well as a difficulty in achieving the overall target. So the risks are fairly multidimensional.
If I can just add to that, I mean, it's a risk that it's shared across London and across the whole country. So the same issues are affecting all councils. And then the question comes about, you know, at what stages, what role is the government going to play in the future in helping to fund some of this? Yeah. And all of this is unknown. I mean, I agree it's a huge risk, but we have at least made, I think, a commitment with our 10 million to start looking at really positive ways that we can move in the right direction. But our own housing stock is, of course, a huge issue.
The difference is that we are, as far as I can understand, the only council that's actually made a full council commitment, not an aspiration or a policy direction, but actually a full binding agreement in council decision to do it within that period. Now, whether we are or whether we aren't, it isn't the same for all boroughs across London.
The feeling that we certainly weren't alone. A number of other councils have made the commitment, but perhaps you're right. There's a nuance there that I hadn't picked up.
Well, it sort of it's not a statement of intent. It's actually a commitment, and there's a slight difference in that.
Yeah, we are in a slightly different position in that although 35% of the housing stock is social housing, only 10% is in the control of the council. Actually, in the estimates that's been done about the climate, the politics about the climate ambition goals, and the switch of energy, the switch from hydrocarbon fossil fuels, the reality of doing that, you're absolutely right. There will come a time when the maths won't work. But what we have to do is to make sure that we focus on council strategy and property, but also at the same time knowing that of the totality, only 10% of it is local, is in Kensington Chelsea, is actually corporate responsibility of Kensington Chelsea. Much of it is private ownership, much of it is behaviour of individuals, and we've, I think, got to engage with that as well, not just focus on our own stuff, but make sure.
The difference there is that the one is the 2030 carbon zero commitment we made, and the other is the 2040 net zero commitment that we made. And I was referring only to the 2030 one because I thought that it was the financial provisions in this financial debate we're having at the moment that we need to make to enable the council to achieve its commitment to do that before 2030.
In order to make financial provision of the scale that's required, would, as Councillor Will mentioned, would require borrowing arrangements, would require government financing and support. So we've set the targets that aligns with government targets, and we're now approaching government with all other authorities about the way in which this is financed.
Right, I have a question from Greg Hammond, and it's for Mary, and he would like you to say a little bit more about the IT changes that feature significantly in the expenditure, and ask what benefits residents will notice.
I think IT is a very interesting area of expenditure, partly because quite a lot of what we do, and I think we don't acknowledge it enough, is pay quite a lot of money to stand still. And I think in the past we've sort of always slightly swept that under the carpet because it seems like such a large investment. But it's an investment that we have to keep making, and we fail to do so really at our peril. So if we look at the sort of investments that we're doing now, I would say about 45% of it is just to keep us up to date and keep our infrastructure sort of sound. Then we also, there's a sort of inflation in expectation about what residents can and can't do online. And quite rightly, we've got aspirations to keep up with that. And I'd say about another 30% of our spending is focused on that. And probably the remaining is focused on trying to, and I know this is a cause close to Will's heart, integrating all our systems in the longer term. And I think along with that will come some savings, but it's quite hard to quantify them at this stage. And the savings will come from, take parking for the moment, as an example. At the moment, you can't establish your own, software doesn't let you have your own account where you can go in and change things and do stuff. Obviously, all of that would, if you were able to do that, would save a number of transactions with human beings, which would obviously be very much more efficient and also much easier for residents. Acquiring a new software with better capabilities will allow us to do that. I mean, that's just one example. So that's a sort of brief resume about where the money's going and the sort of balance between standing still and new capabilities and integrating things better.
So, I think there are no more questions, so I say thank you, Mary and Taryn, and we look forward to meeting you when we have the in-depth sessions with the lead members. And thanks also to Barry. And we will move on to the next item of the agenda, which is, it's A7, I think. I can't find it. We're basically just talking about the work programme, I think, now. Where is it? Okay, so before we start to talk about it, and Mo's just left, two people asked me about having a pre-meeting, and the only reason I don't do it is because I don't want people to think we've kind of fixed it all, or it's staged, or rehearsed beforehand. But if the committee would like to have pre-meetings in before our meetings, then I'm happy to do that, and we could do it either on Teams or we could do it before the meeting itself. You think's no need? What do you think? Online. We could have an online chat a few days before, something like that.
I think that's right. I think it's optional, isn't it, to have that pre-meeting, and
yeah.
it's optional. And I think whoever can make it can make it. But ultimately, we all know the agenda, and as it will be during, we get the notes in advance. So
That's right.
I think it will be fine if people are committed to do pre-meeting. But yes, we leave it optional, as you said before.
And that's like the when we're meeting with the lead members to discuss the budget. Obviously, you want to go to the housing and one, but people can attend all of them if they want. So that's optional. It's optional, yes. But I think it would be a good idea to go to your own area of
Great.
competence. So,
Maybe we should have an urn with tea. It's freezing in here. It's really ridiculous.
I was going to say, I know fuel's gone up, but I'm freezing.
We're absolutely freezing.
well, I'm always cold in this room.
Yeah, I've never seen, look at this. Maybe they should have a hot water for tea or something.
Okay. Jackie, so
Just a suggestion. Can we take a vote?
okay, so has anyone got anything to say on their work programme? No? Okay, well, I've got two additions which might affect you, Kazim, and this is going on to the KDs, actually. I'm skipping along to the KDs. It's about Lots Road, and on page 3 of the KDs, he would like some scrutiny on that one. Okay, Kazim, and the other one he said was on page 13. I think that might be a good thing to do, actually. And on page 13, oops, the other one was Bramley Road, the agreement for the acquisition of the Latimer Community Church, Bramley Road, for improved church and new homes. So those are two things that Greg has picked up that he wants to add to the programme. And I have shifted the date of the OSC to, is it the 21st of February now? Because I am not going to be here, so yeah. And so I don't really have anything else to say about the work programme. I don't know if anyone has anything to say about the flooding meeting, which hasn't gone down that well in some places.
I thought that the undertakings from Thames Water and the controlling authority, Ofwat, were not very helpful.
They didn't undertake anything.
So,
Because my reading of the situation is there is an internal, an independent review. It's going to take 6 months. We've asked, my letter to them is in the back of this pack. So we've asked to confirm, we haven't had a reply, have we, Jackie? No reply yet. So, no. And also the council is undertaking its own review, isn't it, as well?
The council has to undertake a review because the council's a lead local flood authority. So we'll bring some more information to the December meeting. So Patricia Cuervo in planning has been leading on that. She's their lead officer.
thing that I wanted to add to that is that I still remain confused because when I asked fairly persistently for Thames Water, in effect, to take responsibility for dealing with the risk, which no doubt they'd have to work with other agencies and ourselves and other people as well, but basically they seem to say that they're only responsible for maintaining the assets that they have,
yes, and
that they don't actually have any responsibility towards flood mitigation at all.
They kept on saying that. That was their refrain throughout the meeting. And what they were saying is our assets were perfectly on the night. They were denying liability. But subsequent to that, I have looked at insurance for flooding. I've looked at Thames Water, and I've looked at other water authorities, and they all have extreme weather get-out clauses, all of them.
If they all have extreme weather get-out clauses,
they do.
Then basically it is true that they don't have responsibility.
I don't know. I'm not, you know, I'm...
I think the question I'm posing here, if they don't have responsibility and Ofwat can't give them responsibility or make them stand up to their responsibility, then who does, if anybody, have responsibility for it?
It's force majeure, is what they're arguing. And I don't know, but that's what they're arguing.
So what you're saying is it may well be the reality.
It might well be.
That there is nobody responsible for it.
Except, I think the fact, are we all still being, okay. There was a 4-point plan to try and sort it out, and they dropped one element, which was the biggest element, which was the Counters Creek alleviation sewer. And I don't know, is the answer, but I would, that's where I would concentrate.
The other end of this problem, if you like, is the increasing climate change issue, fairly obviously, but there's also the very large developments that are going to be built west of Kensal.
And so they're bricking up more?
No, it's just there's a whole new city about to be built there because of the new train intersections.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, my personal feeling is that we know that the sewer capacity in London, not just in our patch, isn't big enough. And that's why in 2007, when there were floods, and there was a lot of problems then, you know, they came up with this plan. And then in 2018, they dropped an element of it. But, you know, I did look up quite a few, not just Thames Water, and they all said extreme weather conditions is a get-out for them. And, you know, I don't know. Jackie, maybe you can throw some light on this. No?
No, I'm sorry, I can't, but I'll work for the next meeting on a report with colleagues in planning so they can set out responsibilities that the council has.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is I think we're having a paper in December as well about what is the local flood authority. So what, because the scrutiny of it comes to, a statutory scrutiny comes to us, yeah? So we're going to get a paper on that and what our responsibilities are. I don't know.
I'll do a joint report with colleagues in planning so they can bring the information about responsibilities of the council, and my part will be about the statutory responsibilities of scrutiny.
So, I mean, the plan is that we get an update from Thames Water in December, but I don't think that's going to take us very far. I mean, they can at least, I think, improve their letter answering ability and their phone answering ability and things like that they can sort out. But then actually I think it's only when that report comes out that we're going to be any the wiser. Because you are an engineer, Will, but I'm not an engineer. So, you know, these things, it's just a shot in the dark to say maybe that's the reason, but it could have been something completely different. And with this climate change, you see the insurance companies and the loss adjusters and the reinsurance companies, I mean, I don't know what they're doing at the moment. They must be very worried worldwide about what's happening because risk has gone up, and, you know, tremendously. What?
It is going to be a common occurrence.
Oh. So, there we are. So I think I'm going to thank everyone, and especially Jackie.
Sorry, Madam Chair, can I just raise the matter of urgent business?
Oh, forgot.
Sorry, I'll be concise. There's a petition being handed into the council, Save Trellick and Edenham Way. So when the council receives a petition, it can either go to full council or to scrutiny. So where it goes depends on how many signatories there are to the petition. So I don't know. So for council, it's 2,500 signatories. For scrutiny, it's 750. But the petitioners can choose if they prefer to bring it to scrutiny. So this petition, the topic fits very well with the Housing and Community Select Committee, and in particular their meeting on the 13th of December, because they're going to be talking about the New Homes Programme. So parts of the petition are about a particular proposal for a scheme which scrutiny cannot discuss. They can't discuss an individual planning process, but what the committee could do is to discuss the approach to community engagement that's being taken as part of the New Homes Programme. So the petition would be referred to overview, and it would be up to you if you wanted to debate it here, or if you wanted to refer it to Housing and Communities. And the chair might want to say something, but we need the petition. We need the signatures to be counted, and the petitioners to confirm where they would like the petition to go. But I'm just giving you notice that we have had one.
Do we know if it's likely to reach the 2,500 threshold?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay. So it will either go to full council. Kazim, do you want to have it in your committee?
I think it's because of the New Homes Programme. Yes, there is a bit of element of planning involved, and I'm sure other councillors other chairs will get involved, but I think it's a matter of housing, and if for that matter, we'd be more than happy to take on as a housing committee, and if necessary, we can also have Councillor Pascal for his input as chair of the environment, and probably in the angle of planning rather than the environment section of it. But we'd be happy to take this petition onwards, and for upcoming meeting, since it's directly related to the New Homes Programme.
Okay, that's fine. I never understand actually why planning and housing don't go together. I mean, why don't they? But anyway, we are what. So, on that note, I think everyone wants to go home.
Yes.
And thank you everyone. Thank you Martin. Thank you Catherine. Thank you Jackie. And hope everyone has a good rest of the evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.